Ani Bojo Kinawea, Nanagasang Indigenous Cause, Hillary McGregor and Dejaganashin Noswin, Makwa Dodem, wa Skinaga Donjaba, Charnel Denda, Gitchinendang Kanwa Minagoak, Gitchinendang Gi Bajaya Mompi Nongo. So I'm Hillary McGregor. I'm from Whitefish River First Nation. I'm very happy to be here and be a part of this initiative and share my space with my good friend Donovan. So I'll actually pass it on to him to introduce himself and introduce our video and how we would like to answer the question related to strategies for intergenerational resilience and Indigenous knowledge. So I'll pass it on to you, Dion.
Awesome. Miigwech, everyone. Bajo Chidmus Indigenous Cause Descon Zibe Donchaba Mishka K and Dodem. So as Hillary mentioned, my English name is Donovan. I'm from Chippewa the Thames First Nation, and I'm Turtle Clan. And I'm very excited to be here and to kind of show off a little bit of the land that we have and that we're very much blessed with out in the Antler River. So the project that we decided to do in regards to Mother Earth and climate crisis is we wanted to demonstrate and actually show what it looks like a day on the reserve, or some of the blessings that we have with the water, and also understanding all that is creation that we have. So we filmed a little bit of a video, and we also asked one of our good friends, Tia Kennedy, she's from Oneida Nation of the Thames, to give a little bit of input herself, that her own perspective of what Mother Earth means to her. And we included a lot of the language thanks to Hillary. He's very well versed in the language, and so that was a big strong point there. So it's about a 6-minute video. We wanted to introduce it, explain who's all doing it. My good friend Dar Sands helped me edit it together. But yeah, I'm going to share my screen now, and we'll be able to all kind of see the video.
Regarding Indigenous practices that strengthen resilience in addressing climate crisis, Anishinaabe Yodswin, or Indigenous knowledge, is one way Anishinaabe people begin to answer these difficult questions. Anishinaabe Yodswin exists in a variety of forms. This can include Odsokanen, which are legends or teachings, the Baj Moanan, which are stories of everyday life, Naknagewin, which is natural law, and Anishinaabemwin, which is our language. Through connecting to these things, we can first answer questions like, where do I come from? Who am I? Why am I here? And where am I going? First, being able to answer these important questions gives us resilience. Further, in Anishinaabemwin, the term for resiliency is Shkoadzwin. This term combines the concept of strength, Shkauziwin, and knowledge, Oadzwin. To me, this means resiliency is a reflection of our knowledge, which we get through our Odsokanen, our legends, Debajmoanan, our stories, Naknagewin, our law, and Anishinaabemwin, our language. But it's also a reflection of strength, which is to act on our knowledge, to reflect on and implement the strategies that we can derive from our Anishinaabe Yodswin, or our Indigenous knowledge. One of my favorite stories about how we can demonstrate resiliency comes from my home, and it was taught to me by both Joe Petwanakwit and my grandfather, and it's about the beaver, or a mick, and how the beaver demonstrates resiliency. When a beaver is faced with a crisis, and in the context of the beaver that's running water, it does not take a beaver long to act on their knowledge. When a beaver hears running water, for the beaver, it's faced with a crisis, and it doesn't take long for that beaver to address that creek or stream and have a dam. Sometimes a dam is built overnight. When a beaver does this, that can actually promote life and biodiversity. When you start with a small creek or a stream, it can support life for small insects, for some plants, fish, frogs, etc. But when that beaver dams a creek or a stream, it can sometimes create a small lake. Such a lake could support more life, more fish, insects, frogs, snakes, birds, plants, and even people. From this example, we learn the importance of implementing our skills and our knowledge for the benefit of creation and all living things. It's one thing to learn something, it's another thing to implement it. Personally, the beaver motivates me to share what I know, whether that's Anishinaabemwin, so my language, or stories with my peers and future generations. Another strategy for resilience that's important to me is to be on the land or with creation. For example, when I make maple syrup with my family, I'm taught respect, reciprocity, and not to take more than I need. And this is done through interactions with Ziogmede, which is the word for maple syrup, Ninatik, which is the maple tree, or Dinnuendagnak, my family. When I fish, I learn patience, respect, and to be at peace or balance in creation through interacting with the Gigonyak, which is the fish, or Nibe, the water. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, by being on the land, we're taught humility, that we are not always in control of creation as humans. Elements like the wind, Nodin, the rain, Gimiwan, the thunder, Nimki, or the water, Nibe, can quickly change our plans and our outlook when we're on the land. And therefore, we must learn to be in harmony or balance with all of these things. To me, this is the foundation of how we understand and act on climate crisis as an Anishinaabe people. Miigwech.
Our relationship to the land is the greatest relationship of all. Mother Earth is our one true teacher. From the very moment when a child takes its first steps on the grass, when we play outside and are covered in dirt, when we feel the cool, fresh air running across our chubby cheeks and the sun beaming at us, radiating love, when we touch the water for the first time and splash the medicine at our friends, she teaches us every single day from our very first steps here on earth. And it becomes very difficult to watch our mother brutalized, abused, and mistreated. Nothing we can say or do will stop the violence, but we must try. Because it's not simply choosing not to, but it's waking up every day and having to. It's why we've been sent here by Creator, to take care of each other and to take care of Mother Earth. She is what keeps us alive. She is what will keep our next generations going. And she will teach our future to be strong. Like she taught me, and like she's taught us all.
Understanding the importance of relationships that exist in creation is an Indigenous principle that can help the need to address climate change. As part of our identity, we identify a relationship not only to the land that we come from, but also to our spirit animals, always looking for a connection to something in creation. These relationships could be a man's relationship to the fire, a woman's relationship to the water, or a hunter's relationship to the animals. We understand that these relationships exist everywhere in creation. These relationships are often depicted on a circle to demonstrate the level of balance or equal importance of all things included. It is important to not simply identify these relationships, but also understand what is being provided through them. To understand that although these relationships may not be able to walk and talk, they are still beings, living spirits, alive in this world alongside us. We need to view Mother Earth as not an object or a possession, not as something that can be owned, but as family, which is exactly what she's referred to as, a mother, someone that provides for us, nurtures us, and also teaches us. Without Mother Earth and her gifts, we would not have all that we know. We need to remember that all of creation falls within this circle and will always need a level of balance and support and understand the give and take that is being provided. Whether we speak of animals, man, water, the spirit world, all of these things deserve to be treated with the utmost level of respect and love. Understanding our world as a being, a spirit, a mother, is a perspective that would benefit all of relations and understanding. Miigwech.
Wow, Carmen Blomberg, Nisithikasan, Pelican Narrow, Saskatchewan, Peter Ballantyne, Bear Cree Nation. Bonjour, hello everyone, welcome. My name is Carmen. I just introduced myself in my Woodland Cree language. I'm Cree and Norwegian, Sweden, Jewish on my father's side, as well as French and Scottish on my mother's side. I'm very happy to be here today. I'm a Youth Council Advisory Representative on the Surrounded by Cedar Child and Family Services Board. Today, I really wanted to talk about kind of like the work that we do at Surrounded by Cedar. We focus on reconnection to identity, sense of belonging, and culture. Reconnection today, I really want to focus on that. As we look at what's happening to our climate, there's a lot of disconnection in many ways. And I'm hoping that by sharing a story with you today, that we can talk about the reconnection and the responsibilities and leadership roles of the animals, the waters, the lands, and how it's what our responsibilities are, and kind of pose a question and see where we can go from here and learn together. So I want to take a moment and just be mindful that I won't be able to share the full story. However, I've taken some parts out, and the story is called This is a Story, written by Jeanette C. Armstrong. It came to me one early morning when the morning star was up shining so bright, the way she does in the summers. It was during the women's gathering at Owl Rock. It was the same that year the red star came so close to the earth that it was mentioned in the papers. I had been sitting up with the fire. One woman had sat up with me all the time during the gathering. One friend had stayed up with me to help keep me awake. It had been a cold and winter night, and I was wrapped in a Pendleton blanket. It was the second to last of the gathering. I was getting very sleepy when George asked me, "Tell me a story." "Okay," I said. "This story happened a long time ago. It's real." Coyote was coming up the river from the Great Columbian River up to the Okanagan River. Coyote had come up there before, one time before that I know of. That time Coyote came up the Okanagan River, which runs to the Columbian River. There was the time when Coyote brought salmon to the Okanagan. Everyone Coyote stopped at, the people's village, salmon was left. It made everyone happy. It was a great gift. Coyote did that a long time ago. Now waking up after an unusually short nap, Coyote was walking along upstream, wanting to visit the people in the Okanagan. These were Coyote's favorite people. Visiting them always meant a real feast with salmon. Coyote was partial to salmon. While walking along, Coyote noticed a lot of new things. A lot of things had changed since the last trip through there. Coyote had looked and looked for somebody who could talk in the people's language. Coyote asked one person who could talk to Proper how this all had happened. The person was a very old woman. Coyote recognized her name and knew which family and village her people were from. She was an old She was from an old headman family. She looked at Coyote for quite a while and recognized Coyote. Then she cried and cried for a long time. "Coyote," she said, "I never thought you were going to come back. Things haven't been good for quite a while now. I kept hoping you would show up. Them swallows came. We don't know what happened. They did a lot of things. They built the things across the river again, like when they were monster people and you broke the dams to bring the salmon up. I don't think it's made out of spit and clay like the other time, but it made something like that. They did lots of other worse stuff. How come you never came back for a long time? Now look what happened." Coyote was quiet for a while. "Well, I guess I went to sleep for a while. You know, sometimes I oversleep a little," Coyote joked, trying to make her feel better. Actually, Coyote was well known for oversleeping all the time, and actually Coyote used that as an excuse for being too late for something important. But the old woman just kept crying. She kept on talking, saying, "Nobody listens to me. Nobody knows you anymore. You better go up to Vernon, up there in the North Okanagan. Go see Tommy. He keeps telling people about you. Maybe he can tell you what happened." So Coyote continued up the river, stopping at each village. Coyote tried to talk to some of the headmen. Coyote could suggest something like, "We should break the swallows' dams and let the salmon come back." When they knew where to come, they never forget, I told them not to. You shouldn't eat the swallow food. Look at all the sick people. Coyote continued up the river. Coyote had seen a lot of things, people in really bad shape. They walked around with their minds hurt. They couldn't see or hear good anymore. Their bodies were poisoned. Eventually, Coyote came to a place where a young one was sitting by the river. This young one greeted Coyote properly in people talk. He looked at Coyote's staff and asked politely, "Who are you, old one? I know all the old people in the Okanagan. I haven't seen you before, but you look like somebody I must have known before." Coyote sat down and then said, "You look like somebody I once knew, an old chief. He was a really big, important chief. He was so important that he took care of all the people up and down the Okanagan. He never came or never kept a single salmon for himself if somebody needed it. Me, I'm just a traveler. I move along and around a lot, but I'm not sleeping. I move around a lot when I'm not sleeping. Never know where I'll be tomorrow. I'm looking for Tommy, I guess." The young man said, "Tommy? The old man? Yeah, you must mean him. Some of us call him our chief now. It was Tommy told my mom to make that I was sure to sit there and watch the river every day during the salmon run. You see, he knows that I'm a chief of the Kettle Falls. I'm a salmon chief, but no salmon come up here now, and there's no falls there anymore. My great-grandfather was the last salmon chief to see the salmon come up the river. The swallows came after that. Now I wait here and watch the river. Like my father and his father did before him, they died without seeing one salmon come up that river. I guess I will keep on waiting. I believe Tommy when he says that we will not give up, and we shouldn't. Sometimes I think I will see them coming, shining in the clean water. I close my eyes during salmon run time, and I see them. Millions of salmon coming up the river. I see my people singing, all coming down up the river to see and eat with me again what we were given to eat. But then I open my eyes and nothing is ever there. I'm so tired. I'm so all alone here. Nobody else cares. So that was when Coyote took out the shining rainbow ribbons and hung them on his staff. Coyote talked and walked to Tommy's door. Coyote walked up to Tommy's door and said, "Tommy, open the door. I have to come talk to you. I'm going to ask you to get people together, the ones who can hear. Tell them I'm back. You know all of them. I'm going to break the dams. I'm hungry, and that young one at the river has waited long enough. All children will eat salmon again." Coyote shook his staff, and the ground shook too as Tommy came out of the door facing east. You should have seen Tommy's face when he saw Coyote and the rainbow ribbons hanging on the staff. That story happened, I tell you that much. It's a powerful one. I tell it now because it's true. Sometimes I think of that story and that morning at Owl Rock when I see rainbow colors in the oil slicks along the river during salmon run time in the Okanagan, and I feel the ground shake ever so little. This is a story by Jeanette C. Armstrong. She's from the Okanagan Valley. It's really important to kind of share and debrief on the things that were happening in that story. So the disconnection to the land and just understanding the responsibilities of the people of the land and understanding the leadership and the relationships of the animals who connected and provided that sustainability. The salmon knew always where to go until the structure was built. The food is now poisoned in a way that is making the people sick. And there's a saying, a teaching that I learned from the Okanagan book. I cannot remember the name, so I'm going to have to edit that in later and share that with you. It goes, "The people are sick because the land are sick." And I feel like that's a really important thing that we need to listen and kind of just reflect on. And how do we reconnect with the land? What is our responsibility as individuals, visitors, Indigenous, non-Indigenous, settlers, as we gather and occupy these lands? What is our responsibility to care and make a change, to provide that sustainability and help Mother Earth restore the land to the ways it was, to provide for generations to come. As I continue, I wanted to end with a poem that I wrote on that healing note. This poem is called Interconnection. Interconnection, the truth in our experiences, honoring the whole self, listening, calling in to the feeling of our spirits, experience interwoven within, hearing our ancestors, guiding us to do good in the sounds within the spaces between. Reconnection, recognition, relationality, impact over intention, compassion, strength, and resilience, to be heard, to be welcomed, to be loved, healing, all surrounded in circle, self, earth, sky, all living beings in creation. We're all connected. Respect all beings to live in harmony. Wakatoan, Wataskoan, Hi Hi, Kakitau Niwakamakana, all my relations.
So, I'm Bethany Nichglod, and the person who was presenting this with me is Morag Mihi, and I'm giving the Gaelic context, and Morag will be giving a Doric context. So, this kind of brings together what we call Alba, Scotland, and so this is about our mother tongues, or our mother tongues. First of all, about Doric, it's from Aberdeenshire, which is in the northeast of Scotland. And Morag wanted to share this quote with you, which is, Doric is a language that is both a response and interaction to landscape and history of the northeast Scotland. The way we speak and words we use are such a vital way to connect with our emotions, and when learning another language, these deeper thoughts aren't as accessible to you. We don't just lose words and sounds, we lose worldviews. So Doric is a huge asset for the area and adds another dimension to people's tourism experience. But we would also argue that it adds to your human experience. And this was taken from an article, but the key point was about the connection with emotions and the perspective that you get from these languages. If you're reconnecting or connecting for the first time in your history, it can just be such an amazing revitalization, reorientation to what the land means to you and to those around you. Doric itself is one of Scotland's main languages. It's the fourth language it's thought of. Common phrases are fit like, so how are you? And Giza Bosie, give us a hug, which is a key one to know if you go visit Aberdeen. It's not very sunny and quite often raining, quite often cold. People in Canada might relate to that. So we quite say it's very dreich, which is one of the kind of a cold and kind of dreary, grey kind of word. But main question for today is about the Indigenous traditional perspectives and the multi-generational relationship that can help us address climate change. And these are the things that Morag put together. So as many people are aware, climate change is a massive problem in our world right now, which is not good. To help this problem, even a little bit, I feel Indigenous people could help by putting on conferences about how the Doric language is in decline and how they can try and bring it back with helping the environment and by bringing back some of the Doric culture and its relationship with the land. Some of the Doric language is extremely old, as far back as 1792. 1792 was actually when Doric was kind of first recognised rather than its foundation or its origin. Some of the Doric language represents land, such as the other phrase for how are you, fus your doos, which is how are your pigeons, and along with 20 words for rain, which reflects very much the kind of context that most people live in Doric country and most of Scotland. So that was kind of Doric context. In terms of Scottish Gaelic, it's a wee bit better known. the context is that the peoples have experienced clearances over to places like Canada and America, New Zealand, Australia. But there's also been a lot of conflicts over land and over resources, and that has really impacted on the culture and the language. Dealt with absentee lairds and landlords, which means that people are quite often having to fight for their right to work the land, having to pay to work the land, and there's a lot of depopulation and urbanization of the country itself as a whole, but as of these kind of areas as well, which has led to a decline in the language. It's led to a disconnect with the culture, and it's led to a marginalization of the people, which has been very recent for Scotland in terms of its overall history. However, it has recently been seeing revival and resilience. So a rise in young people learning it in Glasgow Gaelic High School. The roll is currently at 400, and that's set to rise to 900 in the next 5 years, which is a massive challenge and an amazing celebration of people reconnecting with their lost language and culture. We've got new learners, but we've got natives returning, or people whose ancestors were natives. It's really exciting to see people who have never had any connection in their history grasping this new language and culture and helping it grow and helping it be restored. But we need the older generations to support these efforts. We have 100 different words for hill and mountain, and that's just a small example of the richness and the variety that we want to make sure is not lost. The language connects us to the land and the land to the language. When you go to the heartlands, the Gaeltacht, the connection you feel cannot be described, and I'm sure everyone who has experienced their native culture and their Indigenous language will feel something similar to that as well. When we look at the climate crisis and how the intergenerational resilience can support that and help us address it, one example is a Lewis wind farm was rejected in 2004. So this was British Energy and AMEC, which I'm not entirely sure what that stands for, proposed this massive wind farm on a moorland in Lewis. So the energy companies saw this as empty land that could be utilised more for combating climate change and creating more renewable energy for Scotland. But the outcry from the population of Lewis was significant, and it was ultimately rejected. But this was one woman's response after seeing the proposal. There's memories flooded back of my mother in failing health, making her annual pilgrimage to Antaltsore, where her native village had their sheilings. Here she would lay another stone upon a cairn, which she'd started building many years previously on the ruins of her family shieling. Both my parents died in 1979, and her family continues this tradition ever since then. And this is one of the proposed sites. So it was actually a sacred site to the people. It was a culturally significant site. It was a site with history, although it seemed like empty land. And when you look at the difference in a smaller community-owned land, and the trust built a wind power project that was approved in 2009, it was much smaller, it was much more sensitive, much more caring to the community themselves. And that was something that worked and that was sustainable. When we look at communities impacting the climate crisis, Giga and the Isle of Egg are amazing examples of a community coming together to create solutions that fit and that are a sustainable change that is not going to harm the culture, that is not going to harm the people that are there, and is not going to discourage people from coming back and reconnecting with that land. It's community owned and it's community governed, and they feed back into island life. So both these islands have their own energy turbines. I think both are wind, and Isle of Egg makes money from it. Giga, it goes back into the island life. It is giving people agency to make sustainable and culturally sensitive change. And it's all ages working together to conserve and celebrate culture, language, and land. And I think it's the celebration that is key, because if you're not celebrating this, then you're not going to have that passion. And this was just a little tune, which I'm afraid the PowerPoint has changed the format there, I think, and put the symbol over the words. But it's a Gaelic song. It's quite a new one, but it's Cúm ur cúmur cúmur nara. An iar sin nalt a gaachshiv. Skainig kainig gno akiv duch is arich agus luch viran. So it's keep your attention on the West and on the place you left. And remember that you had a special and precious heritage there. And I think that is key. And thank you. That's me.
Hi, my name's Ian Tate. I'm from Shetland, which is part of the United Kingdom. It's the most northerly county, and we're a fairly small island group stranded in the North Atlantic. My own lineage isn't very varied, in that certainly for 5 generations back, plus all of my antecedents are all from these islands. And in a way, my own genealogy denotes in miniature the history of the islands, because about 50% of the surnames derive from Scandinavian Norwegian surnames, who were, one might say in parentheses, the indigenous people of these islands, but those of course had supplanted an earlier Celtic population before Viking times. And the other 50% of the surnames in my own ancestry are Scottish surnames, because there was another colonization by settlers from Scotland from the 16th century onward. So in a way, this shows that cultures cannot be seen as being static or immutable in any way. The nature of cultural interaction can, at its worst, be fractious, belligerent, violent, and at the other end of this continuum, it can be wholly consensual, beneficial for all parties. And I'm sure that all of the members of this group, in their own respective cultures and ancestry, will have experienced some of that interaction or interdependence on that continuum between extremes. Before our meeting today, Macri and I had a pre-meeting, and it was very exciting, even before hearing the presentations we've had today, to get a sense in how cultures are on the move, and how the planet is on the move, world economy is on the move, and not always in a beneficial way. And this multi-stranded approach, I suppose, means that there are various means to ameliorate these problems, because as we know, the world ecology is under increasing stress and strain, which is a thoroughly bad thing. And where planet Earth's peoples and cultures still living by indigenous ways of life, subsistence ways of life, without the vulgarizing force of a globalized capital on the move, then surely we would all be in a better state. However, and this is a main thrust of what I'd like to get across here, is that I'm afraid we live in a world of nuance. It's all too easy to take a very dogmatic point of view and say this constitutes indigenous culture, that doesn't. This is the correct way to express some element of native language or dialect, or to do some folk custom, and that's the wrong way. However, people, whether they like it or not, they pick and choose of what they do. So say all of us, everybody in this meeting, myself included, cherish traditional life ways. We love to know about our own and other people's traditional cultures, their languages, their traditional farms and homes, the way to tend livestock and to grow crops, to make garments, whatever it may be. And that seems very idealistic. But I'm afraid we're all unwittingly benefiting from the destruction of the planet too, because some huge multinational is busy mining away the minerals of the world to make all the electronic gadgetry that's sustaining this meeting. So it's maybe a bit insoluble, I don't know.
Tēnā koutou, kia koutou katoa. Ko Araki me Shahalia na maunga, ko Waitaki me Hlochkluni na awa, ko Waitaha na iwi ki Aotearoa. Nā reira, kia koutou katoa, tēnā koutou. I really was so moved by what I heard. I deeply moved at the bringing back of those deeply held traditional ways of being with the land, the ways of being with one another, the lessons about humility, the lessons about the protocols of sharing, the giving back that I heard in all of those presentations, especially at the beginning. I was remembering some of the protocols from home, such as always honoring the beings of the water, of the ocean, of the river before you take, by giving the first catch to Tangaroa, God of the ocean, and so forth. And I was reflecting for perhaps the millionth time about the ways in which we no longer talk about our relations so much as we talk about a resource, and the way in which I hear that, at home and also here, as we've seen the fruits of development and the ideologies of development take root in response to decades and decades of poverty and marginalization and dispossession and so forth. And reminded again also of the ways in which the language teaches us those things, which I heard so beautifully, and which Ian and I were having quite a vigorous discussion about earlier, in the recovery of those traditional languages and the recovery of those traditional songs, the things that they teach us about how to take care of the place in which we are. I'm reminded of, our traditional genealogies, which position us within this grand interconnected web that connects us, to the stars, to the beginning of creation, all the way down. The ways in which some of our relations, some of our elders, some of those amongst our tribes who hold that knowledge can recite those genealogies that connect us all. And I've heard particular cousins of mine do that at great length. I know of people that can recite those genealogies for days on end, and they are about the ways in which we are all connected, not only to each other, but also to all those beings that are seen and those beings that are unseen. These are what our genealogies remind us of and place us in. And so the importance from me, from where I sit, And let me say that I am extremely grateful to be sitting here on Treaty 6 territory, you know, in this land that has been occupied and remains to be occupied for so many aeons by Cree, by Lakota Sioux, and by Blackfoot, and by many, many others. And this place here where I am has been a place of coming together, of joining, of exchange, of exchanging stories, exchanging taonga, exchanging treasures for a very long time. And so I'm really, really honored to be sitting here in this place of such deep interconnection here in North America. And again, you know, how do we are caught in this, some of our people, all of our people, wherever we are from, we are caught in this contradiction of, as I've heard so many times, out of poverty on the one hand, and on the other hand, the desperate need to protect and to regenerate and to reclaim and to bring back. Because one of the things that I do, or that I've had the privilege of doing recently, is to be a contributing author on the on the IPCC 6th Global Assessment Working Group 2 report that just came out, and my contribution was to the chapter on water. And so as a member of the Waitaha tribe, which actually means literally the carriers of the water, and listening to those presentations about water were very, very significant to me, because water is in deep, deep distress, and all beings rely on water. And so those traditional teachings that I listened to just now, about how we respect the water, the beaver who instinctively goes to immediately implement those skills and that knowledge, and the way in which that enhances life for all the beings there. And on the other hand, the salmon, the significance of the salmon, and the damming of the rivers that has prevented the salmon. And so salmon is at the one and the same time the victim of commodification, and on the other hand also the victim of being unable to fulfill its journeys and the ongoing impacts of that. And so as I think about this, as I do day and night, about the state that our world is in, the beings of the world are in, and of course the people of the world are in, we're seeing that in Ukraine right now, the result of greed and power and all of those things. It reminds me all the time of the absolute importance of this kind of work that you are doing, and Lewis and everybody here is doing. That it is surely the most important thing right now. And as I heard right at the beginning, I think from Brittany, we're called here to be here at this point in time to take care of, to heal the damage that we have done to Mother Earth, and to also heal ourselves.
Well, what Macri and I were talking about before, and it's come through strongly in the presentations today, is the ethnological, one could almost say antiquarian nature of collecting folk culture, as opposed to the anthropological nature of it, because languages and dialects, they weren't created by academics. They're very much bottom up. They were the property, if one likes, of folk cultures. But through the 20th century and now in the 21st, nuance is gradually being eroded away, just as a glacier erodes away a mountain range, and big beasts like English and Mandarin and Spanish, they're pushing out other languages because it makes social, commercial, cultural sense if people ally themselves to those big monsters in that way. So in turn, it's necessary for anyone such as all of us here in this meeting, who are concerned about and cherish folk cultures, we've got to collect information, and we must tabulate it and record it. And in so doing, are we doing it in order to almost make it an ossuary of old defunct knowledge, or are we collecting it to use it as a teaching aid? And if any culture is having to maybe self-consciously teach the folk ways of its own people to its own people, does this actually mean that the battle is, if not lost, it's already maybe on the downward slide? I'm going to leave that one as a non sequitur, because I don't really know what the answer to that one is.
So Ian, I have an answer that is being operationalized, to use that language here, and that is land-based pedagogy. So going back to the issue that we were talking about before, land-based pedagogies, it's happening all over, North America, all over Canada here. Teachings on the land, part and parcel of university courses even, as a response to, certainly to language and cultural regeneration, but to more than that, as a response to, to the crisis of this time. And so I want to push back against the idea of collecting it as, something to be preserved and put in a museum archive, and I did talk about digital archives, and certainly, I mean, people in the far north and the Inuit people, some of particular tribes there, Inuit tribes, are certainly developing those digital archives, etc. But for the language, for the ways of doing things, etc., land-based. So I think that all of those opportunities, all of those practices are certainly about reholding and reclaiming and restoring, but they're also about the necessity, I believe, the necessity of restoring how we live on this earth. And we did have a conversation about the fact that if we take Ukraine, I mean, Russia and Ukraine have been the wheat belt of the world. And you were talking yourself, Ian, about the way in which people used to grow their own wheat on the islands there and so on. And so the need to go back to community-based ways of living, as we heard on Sky, and that battle about the wind farms on Lewis has been going on forever and ever, and is certainly not going anywhere soon. But in response, developing local wind farms, and I know that's not language and culture, but it's an example of how we can restore community, re-language, all of those things, community.
Something that I was picking up excitedly from the presentations today is how people, and it's the younger people, the younger attendees, who invigorate me most, because of course they have to carry this on after our allotted span on earth is gone, how they're cherishing their own culture and seeking to promote it. However, one can quite gainfully ask of any culture, what is that you're seeking to promote? Because no culture in 2022 is exactly as it was in 1922, nor yet in 1822. And through the gradual incursion of globalized ideas, and it's mostly today, and we're not talking about the 19th century, we're talking about now. For us in the developed world, it's mostly consensual adoption. We want this damned thing because it's useful for us, and it means that probably the version of a traditional culture that we're cherishing, sustaining, pushing forward is needs must a rather depleted version of its former self, because certain elements of life have gone forever. You know, we don't build our houses, make our crops, tend animals as we did 100 years ago, even 50 years ago. So therefore, the lexicon, the artifacts, and the knowledge pertaining to all those elements of the culture must disappear. Some things can live on, music, say, poetry, things pertaining to emotions or states of mind, but so much of the practical, empirical knowledge that sustain traditional cultures, that's going to disappear. So if this is going to be a paean to any purpose at all, it would be great if we could, just as we can with ecology, we can opt to rewild, to turn back the clock, I suppose, before human depredation. It would be great if we could rewild traditional cultures. That's really what I'm saying.
When you earlier, Ian, you talked about what I would describe as salvage ethnology, and how do we go beyond that? And one way we in Scotland are trying to go beyond that is through what we describe as creative ethnology, where we use the same archives, this material we've collected, the work we are still collecting from communities, as three of our colleagues are doing at the moment as resident ethnologists, creative ethnologists in the Dandelion Project, where they deal with food and the land and connections, community connections to the land. We use that in new ways to transmit tradition into the future in new and kind of imaginative ways. So there was quite a lot inspiring thought there today. And at one point halfway through, I felt very privileged, having grown up at a point in time and in history where this connection with the land and the world around us was actually part of the school curriculum where I grew up. It has since been shoved out, and now we teach not so much professional, but vocational skills and all these things that are good for getting jobs that in the global economy, which take us away from that connection. And it's almost become a subject non grata, and Bavaria held on longest in Germany of all the German countries to this element in the curriculum, but now it's well and truly gone. I was just going to say a few words about a phenomenon that is described here as New Scots, and which connects a little bit to some of the things that we were heard in the presentations as well. New Scots indicates that these are people who are not from here, and of course New Scots was originally used for former Commonwealth people coming into Britain in the 1960s, not into Scotland in the 1960s. And nowadays it's also used for people from other origins, including EU nationals and most recently people from the Ukraine. It also reveals a particular turn in the political discourse here in Scotland, the discourse on identity and belonging, because the New Scots may not be from here. Obviously, most of them are not from here, but we may come to here. And what does that mean? And in another context, one could describe that as becoming Indigenous, which sounds a bit of a contradiction in terms, and it remains quite difficult to grasp still, certainly analytically. It's easier to grasp emotionally. But there is a very strong emphasis among the New Scots on land and place and the connection with place. And that emphasis is normally in our Western European, North Atlantic world of discourse associated with exclusion, where people sort of stand their ground and they don't want to integrate others coming in and so on. But in Scotland, it seems to signify a way of inclusion. And a society like that is connected with place in a way other than by legal commercial title, that doesn't own the place in the Western developed business kind of sense, but in a deeper sense, would also such a society would be much better capable of tackling the issues of sustainability that we spoke about today, and the constituent communities that are facing these issues. And this emerging Scottish identity, which is a fusion of old Scots and new Scots, as it were, seems to be built not so much on a romantic ethnic nation or an enlightened civic nation that some people talk about in the academia, but rather what one might call a community of spirit. So that's something that is quite evident I see it very clearly in the Scottish context of the last few years, where people that share a particular political, economic, and social set of concerns combined with ecological commitment to the stewardship of place in all its facets, those become main criteria rather than maybe other historically more important one. And it's quite interesting to see in this context the debate bubbling up in the academic literature on the Gaeltacht. I'm pronouncing that in the Irish way now because I'm more fluent in Irish Gaelic than I'm in Scottish Gaelic. There's recently been quite an eye-opening clash of cosmologies between people who work within the Western paradigm and looking at the situation of Gaelic and its potential for revival and all of that, and the more courageous but also very respectful attempts to view Scotland from an Indigenous perspective. And I think that has a lot to say to us and deserves a lot more attention in the months and years to come.
Just before Makari closes us with a karakia, closes this Wisdom Council, I just want to hand the torch back to the younger people who are still present here. And one of the things that was just touched upon in just the last couple of minutes was about bringing tradition into the future. And so I'd just like each of you just to, if you can just comment briefly what that would mean for you as a younger person with all the issues that and the challenges that we are facing today, and of course including our climate crisis, which is both a reality, but it's a metaphor and a lens for many of our other challenges. So if you would just like to, one by one, if anything you can offer about bringing traditions with you into the future in ways that can serve humanity, but all our relations.
I'm happy to come in first. I have actually conducted some research that touched on that. I did an arts intervention into new learners of Gaelic in Glasgow and their identity to the language. And it's something I felt quite strongly about, that language needs to evolve and culture needs to evolve. It can keep its connection and it can keep its traditions and it can keep its richness, but it needs to be allowed for young people to feel like this is ours and we can keep moving with it and we can see its relevance to us and we can see our impact on it. And I think that can be a very hard thing, particularly for languages who've fought and cultures who've fought so hard to keep anything that is theirs, to feel like it's okay to see it changing and evolving. And it can be a scary thing to hand the torch over to a younger generation and trust them to preserve what is sacred about that, while also allowing it to go through them and into the next generation and evolve and change again. But when I was speaking to people in the intervention, there is this kind of cry of, can we please have things moving away from Outlander and tartan and just the kind of the tropes that are constantly surrounding our language, and can we have it be ours, and can we have it, you know, involved in contemporary art and involved in contemporary music and involved in lots and lots of different contemporary spaces, with still it being informed by the tradition, still it being kept sacred by the people, but celebrated in a new way, which would be my comment, which I understand could be quite controversial to maybe the more traditional keepers. But I do feel quite strongly that that's the way things move forward.
Sorry, I would love to go. Yeah, I think what was just shared is a big part of it. Like Bethany's saying, we need kind of that element of adaptability. That's something that's always been said about Indigenous people, that in order to be here, as long as we've been here, you have to adapt to what comes at you next, what issues you have to face. And sometimes it seems like we slowed down on that a little bit in this era that we're in, where we're talking about technology and all these things, to try and build a hybrid where we can have that bridge and that branch over between these elders and these young people, to not give up completely the core values of their traditions, but to be able to actually have an avenue to deliver the information. Because if it just goes to the grave with all of our elders because they're too proud to, adapt or be involved with technology, then it's like, what is the point of having it in the first place? And that's the point of having our elders, is that humility and that learning piece. And so that's another part of it. What I just want to touch on that. I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. But my thing is also with like identity and humility need to be like the big pieces of it. First of all, identity, understanding who you are and where you come from and where your family comes from, which will inspire you to try and learn and understand those different avenues, but also practice that humility while you're doing that, that knowing you're not going to have all the answers, and the first person you ask is probably not going to have all the answers. And on the other side of that too, the issue of people being worried about being less than, like over here, there's a big thing with like blood quantum and how much to get your status card and all of these different issues that stunts people's exploration into being an Indigenous person or into being a person from anywhere in the world, that only if they're 5% or whatever, that they feel like they're less than and can't really reach out for those supports. So always practicing that humility and understanding that you're not ever really going to know it all. Like some of the best elders you ever meet and speak with, like they say, like they know like that much and they're like the most knowledgeable people but practicing that and understanding that identity piece and making those connections that we kind of talked about earlier, that those relationships that we have, and understanding is trying to look for the commonality between people and all things in creation, instead of looking for the differences, which we see too often. So I think that's kind of mine. Adaptability to keep these traditions moving on to the future, the identity of understanding what roles and responsibilities you have to learn these things, to be able to pass them down for generations. And then third, I think the humility piece, to be able to sit there and learn these things, but also express that you don't know all of the things. You don't have all of the answers. And that's what I always joke around with Hillary, like something in the language, she's very strong in the language. That's something I don't have, but it doesn't make me less than or him more than, but just an opportunity to create that relationship, to build both of us up, and just kind of make the spirit stronger. So yeah, that's just kind of my reflection to that. Miigwech.
Sensei, hello again. Thank you so much for everything that you've all shared. I'm really resonating with so much and learning a lot. I wanted to tie in the ideas around becoming Indigenous that you had shared, Yolrit. I'm sorry if I keep pronouncing your name wrong.
You're doing fine.
When you shared becoming Indigenous, and I just recalled that reconnection to culture and bringing back tradition. As my father is a residential school survivor, I didn't know of my culture until a couple of years ago, and started to make the reconnection to my Cree ancestry with him. And through that, we've been connecting, and our relationship with each other has grown so much stronger. And in that, I've started to heal myself and feel healing with our family, and also in that, like all the interconnection pieces of the land and what our responsibility is, and just honoring my whole being, and sharing that humility and like all of the different ancestral ties that I do carry. The connection with family is so important to me. And just from the teachings of my Kwakwaka'wakw brother, the teachings around salmon today, I am so grateful to have shared that story by Jeanette C. Armstrong, and just I really felt my brother's presence and spirit while I was sharing that and the teachings that he shared with me on the importance of giving back to the life that gives us life and the sustainability. So connecting language to land, and the land we learn the language from the land. And I think as time goes on, it's so important to connect with elders. I just really appreciated that, learning what we can and then adapting. And the contemporary piece, if I can, I'll share a picture that will kind of close my final thoughts around interconnection and the poem I shared earlier today. This is a picture that I painted recently. The interconnections of the bear with my ancestors and how the roots connect the spirit of the fire and the cedar tree, the Sitka tree, and how it's all interconnected. And you can see the smoke going up into the sky, sending the prayers and to the spirits to answer our prayers and to communicate with one another, because it's so often that we get disconnected from the messages that we receive from our ancestors and our spirits and the beings around us that share our space. And you know, they just really care for us, and if we care for them and show our responsibility and our care, it's just so important. On the side you'll see tobacco, traditional flowers, just one of the contemporary pieces, and then kind of like, yeah, it's interesting because there's a little bit of a traditional piece with the flowers, and my dad really likes to sketch, so I feel like I picked up some pieces from him. Yeah, and this is one of my favorite pictures that I've painted recently, and I'm just so happy to share it with you today. Miigwech, Tiniki, thank you very much, everyone. And Askuman, thank you from the bottom of my heart. And free.
Kia ora, Carmen. Na mihi nui. Makere, if I could just ask you just to say any closing words and just to follow with the karakia for our Wisdom Council today.
Kia ora, Lewis. Na mihi nui kia koe moto mahi tino pai a taha tene mahi. Thank you for this incredibly important work that you're doing, and for inviting us all to be in part of this. And I'm honored to be a small part of it. I thank you for that. The karakia that I am going to share tonight is one that Justice Joseph Williams, Justice Joseph Williams, Joe Williams, is a much loved Maori judge in Aotearoa, New Zealand. He was the first language speaker to be appointed to the judge's bench in the Court of Appeal, and he was for many years the chief judge of the Māori Land Court. Joe, Sir Joe as he is now, was speaking on a seminar on treaties last night on a webinar, and much of what they were actually talking about spoke very much to this. Joe closed with this karakia, and as I listened to it, I knew it was absolutely relevant to what this work is. He described the meaning of this as deeply about gratitude for place. And so I offer this karakia for all of us, for this work, and for place, gratitude for place. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai. E he ake ana te ātakura he tio, he huka, he haunga, haumie, huie, taihiki e. The translation is this: get ready for the westerly and be prepared for the southerly. It will be icy cold inland and icy cold on the shore. May the dawn rise red-tipped on ice, on snow, on frost. Join, gather, intertwine.